Good evening. Welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. I'm so glad to be able to connect with you all in this way. Tonight we're going to take a look at the parable of the petulant children. This is from Dr. Claypool's work in his book called Stories Jesus That Still Tells. And this is a very little known parable that Jesus talked about, but it is so full of such insight. It has a whole lot to do with how people feel about themselves during normal times, but particularly in tough times like this. I think it is so relevant, and I think you'll really find this to be very helpful and insightful. The parable of the petulant children reads this way: To what then will I compare the people of this generation, and what are they like? They are like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not weep. For John the Baptist has come eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say he has a demon. The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and you say, Look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Nevertheless, wisdom is vindicated by all her children. Well, this setting of the story is a typical Palestinian village in the days of Jesus. You can imagine an open market square with children running around in every direction. And these same children are the primary focus of this story. And any parent or teacher can very quickly talk about the dynamics that children have. There are distinct groups, the proposers and the reactors. In this sense, it's one of the children saying, let's do this, and then the others either saying that they would or would not do it. The very first thing that reminds me of is I was both when I was in school, because I would propose somebody else to go do something that they shouldn't do, and then I would get in trouble for laughing too hard at it. So I was on both sides of this issue. But this is very reflective of kids saying, let's play wedding, let's dress up like our parents and act like we're getting married. It brings back such fond memories of my girls when they were little, when they would decide to play church. One would say, let's play church, and the other one would say, okay or no. But sometimes they would act out the church service, and I always got a big kick out of that. But in this instance, they say, let's play wedding. And the reactor said, no, we don't want to play wedding. We don't feel like it. We don't want to do happy things right now. We're not in a good mood for that. So he says, so the story goes that the other one say, okay, so you're feeling bad? Let's go with where you are. Let's play funeral instead. This playing of the flute would have been something that was typical in a Palestinian funeral. So he says, if a wedding was the high point of joy in the Palestinian culture, the funeral experience was at the opposite end of the spectrum. It was a season of great heaviness and mourning. So Jesus is setting up these two extremes here. And the children have the same response to both of those. No, we don't want to play funeral either. He says, what is it with you people? The story goes, we piped and you did not want to dance. We wailed and you did not want to weep. For God's sake, what do you want to do? And he says what Jesus is mirroring here is one of the deepest problems in all human life, the presence of a spirit of chronic dissatisfaction. Have you ever known someone that was just totally dissatisfied with everything in their life? I actually did a whole sermon one time called Chronic Dissatisfaction, and it was really about my grandmother. My grandmother was constantly criticizing everything. This is my mom's mom. I can remember the first thing that she would always say when we went to her house to see her is, "Hi, honey, good to see you." And then she'd go, "Make sure and take off those muddy shoes before you get on my clean carpet." And she would put down those plastic runners through the house anytime we came over. There was always this sense of something being wrong. Well, Jesus uses this story to describe where he was in the unfolding of his own career. You can remember that when Jesus began his ministry, he experienced a whole lot of success. But then, as time went on, this kind of chronic dissatisfaction among the people that he's characterizing this story began to surface with people criticizing him. He was learning that he could only get a fraction of the things done that he wanted to do. And this is a reflection of the realism on Jesus's part. He was a realist in what he was doing. So he describes this as this story illustrates two forms of change strategies. One is a revolutionary approach. Here's what is wrong with what you have and what you have to do, or you're going to have to change to survive. These are radicals. That would have been John the Baptist. He was a radical. He was the consummate outsider who was very confrontational in his approach. And at first, he created quite a stir, but he frightened people so much by his dire predictions that they began to regard him as crazy or totally out of touch with reality. So the parable talks about John the Baptist, but now, on the other hand, Jesus became a very different sort of change agent. He was more evolutionary than revolutionary. His approach was to breathe new life on slumbering embers, to take the good that was already there and find a way to make it grow. A very different approach than that of the radical who comes with fire in his eyes and says, unless you change, terrible things are going to happen to you. Jesus came and was trying to get the people to grow evolutionary change. So he suffers while other people are suffering. And from that perspective, he seeks to call forth the best and cast out the worst in people. So this is the way Jesus went about the redemptive task. He identified himself with the people he was trying to save. He became what the people were so that they might become like he was. And so he was like them in every good way. He even loved a good party. So what did the people of that day say about Jesus, who chose to work from within rather than from without? Truth be told, they rejected him with the same kind of chronic negativism that the children displayed in this story. He proceeded to love each one as that he ever met as if there was no one else in all the world to love, and he loved all as he loved each. Jesus identified with the least and the last and the worst, and what happened? The very same people who rejected John the Baptist for being too negative rejected Jesus for being too loving. What did they say about him? They said he was a drunkard and a glutton. They said there's no difference between him and the worst people in society. So two different approaches to redeeming the world had been tried, and the people of that era wound up rejecting both of them. This little tiny story was a description of that moment in history and how the best that God had to offer was not enough because of the negative mindset of the very people that Jesus came here to save. So a chronic condition of dissatisfaction is a basic problem with many of us. It's the very depth of evil in the human condition that Jesus was trying to confront, the wound that Jesus most wants to touch and to heal. I'll never forget hearing this old story about this woman who was convinced that something was wrong with her husband. She was convinced that there was something wrong with his health, and absolutely insisted that he go to the doctor over and over again. Each doctor kept running the tests and saying, no, nothing is wrong. She finally convinced a surgeon to do an exploratory surgery on him. So the surgeon finally agrees and comes back and tells her, ma'am, we opened up your husband, and I'm glad to tell you that there is absolutely nothing wrong with him. And her reaction was, boy, I sure do hope that scar doesn't get infected. There is this idea that some people just are convinced that something has got to be wrong, just a chronic dissatisfaction. And this parable is helping us to see how we might find ourselves or recognize that part of ourselves. And he just does a beautiful job of it. He says, Jesus came into the world to save us from this very condition. It's the basic anxiety about oneself. Have you ever heard me say this before, that in one sense we all suffer from the worst fear, or all of us have the same worst fear, that if we were fully known, that if people really knew who we really were, that we would be rejected, not just from the people out there, but rejected by the people we love. We all have that working in the back of our mind to some degree, and we all have to deal with that in one way or another. He makes this beautiful point that the risen Christ is able to go back with us down all of our bad memories, and at each place where we've been hurt, we can be healed as surely as he healed the lame and the blind during his early ministry. In other words, as if we have a relationship with the risen Christ, he's able to go back through time with us and reinterpret those bad things that have shaped us in a negative way and change the way we perceive them. No longer see them as stumbling blocks, but stepping stones in order to be more fulfilled and live a great life. We shift from thinking how bad we were to how good God is. And if we are made in the image of God, then we have it within us to reinterpret those things that have harmed us. Literally being born again. Isn't that beautiful? He says, what begins with a new understanding of our birth extends to the world itself, which means the spirit of the petulant children, the essence of sin, is replaced by the spirit of the one who looked on creation in the first place and pronounced it good. Literally looking at us, being able to, for us to be able to come to the conclusion that it is good, it is very good. He says, this way of seeing is the only antidote I know to the spirit of chronic dissatisfaction that characterized those children in Jesus' story and is still prevalent among us today. We can spend the rest of our lives asking, why am I not good enough? Unless we allow the risen Lord to take us all the way down our memory lane so that we are truly able to re-perceive the event of our birth. This is the beginning of seeing all things anew and aright, and also the beginning of grateful and joyful living. And boy, don't we need to hear that in our world today. I hope this has been meaningful for you the way it has been meaningful for me, and I ask God's blessings on you until we meet again.